Over the last couple of years, there's just been a massive transformation in the television ecosystem in general. And it's been driven by what's going on in connected television. And a lot of that change is being driven by you and I. It's being driven by consumers because we've made a different choice around how we want to watch television. And this change was already in place a few years ago. A lot of consumers were moving to all of these great new AVOD services out there. And that change accelerated massively over the last year. With everyone working from home during COVID, I think that accelerated probably a few years of change into about a 9-month period where we just saw a mass shift in consumer behavior into the connected television world. And what that means, kind of more practically speaking, from a marketer and for the programmatic ecosystem, is that we saw a huge influx of inventory come into the programmatic media ecosystem, which was driven again by just consumer behavior and more consumption on those AVOD services. But where that connects to programmatic is it generates more ad impressions and generates more inventory that flows into the ecosystem for advertisers who use platforms like the Trade Desk to buy media against. And that has really put connected television and programmatic really perfectly aligned for the moment in time that we're in right now. Today in programmatic on our platform, we see 87 million households on our cross-device graph. That's a really important number because now we've reached this equilibrium point where in connected television, you can reach as many households as you can in linear television. It's kind of mind-blowing to think about that, but we crossed that equilibrium point in Q4 of 2020, where you can reach as many, if not a few more households in CTV than you can in linear. That's just an amazing milestone. And I think speaks to the acceleration that we've seen across connected television and then how that connects into the programmatic ecosystem today.
So Tim, how do you balance AVOD investment around reach versus scale? That's one issue I'd love to explore. And also, what are the expectations from the buy side, from marketers around AVOD investment?
Yeah, I'll start with a question about scale as it relates to the AVOD ecosystem. So if you rewind maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there was definitely some anxiety around, hey, can I scale my campaign in connected television? Is there actually enough inventory out there for me to run my campaign? And that kind of scale myth, if you will, around connected television, especially as it relates to programmatic, is completely gone these days for all of the reasons that we talked about earlier. There's been this mass consumer shift into connected television. That in turn generates an enormous amount of inventory that then flows into the programmatic ecosystem. So that myth that, hey, there's no scale in connected television is completely gone at this point. As it relates to reach, going back to something we were talking about earlier, today in the household graph that we operate at the Trade Desk, you can reach 87 million homes through that cross-device graph. That's fascinating because now what that means is that connected television from a reach perspective is on par with linear television. And we crossed that equilibrium point in Q4 of 2020. And that was probably one of the most under-discussed milestones of 2020, that now I can reach as many people in connected television as I can in linear. And that's created enormous opportunities for advertisers where they can find incremental reach. And honestly, they can just find reach now in connected television, which certainly wasn't the case 5 or 6 years ago. But I think we've crossed this tipping point in CTV now where it's just becoming a core part of any marketer's media plan.
Now you have the reach, but what about the measurement, and where does that stand, and where should that be going?
One of the amazing things about CTV, especially in the programmatic ecosystem, is that we've long held the belief that this notion of omnichannel marketing was always going to be the holy grail for the advertiser and the marketer. I want to see how my touch points across all of these different media types ultimately impact a sale or impact a brand lift study or whatever my KPI might be. Now that we've added CTV into that mix, it's become a really powerful component of how I connect an exposure on CTV to an ad that I ran on a digital audio service, ultimately downstream to either an online or offline purchase. And so that connectivity is just incredible today in the CTV ecosystem. Now, admittedly, we still have some work to do in how we bridge the worlds between linear and CTV, because despite all of the consumer shift that's happened, we're still going to live with 1 foot in and 1 foot out of linear and CTV for a while, even though we've reached this equilibrium point. So the better we can do as an industry to bridge those two things, to talk about, hey, here's my linear investment, what additional reach and additional frequency do I need to invest in CTV to make sure that I'm having a cohesive and consistent conversation with the consumer out there? I think there's a little bit more work to do there. But as far as adding CTV to the programmatic media mix and being able to connect that downstream to online and offline results, that's possible today.
Now, Tim, what would you tell, and how do you observe the sell side, the AVOD platforms in terms of what they're doing programmatically? A lot of them have grown up. Tubi, for one, as a programmatic platform, actually before it was an AVOD. How do you see the approach of these AVOD, these sort of digital native TVs almost, what they're doing, how you're working with them, and their opportunities?
Yeah, when you look across the broader AVOD ecosystem, I think nearly everyone has embraced programmatic, and that's amazing to see. And so you have players like Tubi, which is part of Fox, as really just an early adopter and someone who's really embraced programmatic from the start. And then when you look at other players who were kind of, as you mentioned, born out of kind of an AVOD digital ecosystem like Pluto, which is now part of Viacom CBS, like those types of players have embraced programmatic from the very beginning. And then when you zoom out and look across the entire ecosystem of AVOD, you also have players like Hulu, which is part of Disney. You also have new entrants to the market like Peacock and HBO Max and others that have ad-supported models. And so I think the industry on the whole has embraced ad-supported as a key way to monetize all of the incredible content that's out there from the major broadcasters today.
And Tim, tell us just briefly, what the road ahead is for the Trade Desk, particularly in the TV space, both here in the States and of course globally. Where are we going to go from here? Where are you guys going from here?
Yeah, I think what we're going to see as far as it relates to just the next several years in the CTV ecosystem is we're going to continue to see a shift in consumer behavior. I think those lines are still going to continue to move in that we're still seeing some erosion in linear subs that continues. And we're also continuing to see this accelerated increase of adoption in the CTV space. And as we talked about earlier, nearly every single major broadcaster has embraced ad-supported models for their streaming services, whether it's NBC or Disney or Fox or Viacom CBS. They've all embraced this AVOD model for their streaming services. And that's just incredibly exciting to see, because when you have scaled platforms like a Hulu or a Pluto or a Tubi, these ecosystems are going to be core elements of how marketers think about their media plans in CTV. I think one of the changes we will see over the next couple of years is just an increased investment from a marketer's perspective, because I think, like with many accelerated changes, the marketing dollars tend to lag just a bit. And so I think what we'll see over the next couple of years is an increased focus from advertisers and marketers of, hey, I want to bring my data and I want to target against the television ecosystem. And that's now possible through programmatic. It's now possible through these AVOD services. And so I think that shift that we've seen on the consumer side from a media consumption perspective is now going to be followed by a shift in advertising dollars that will move more rapidly into these AVOD services than it has in years past, because they're just following the shift in consumer behavior. And so it just makes a ton of logical sense. It just tends to lag just a bit as far as the advertising dollar shift. So I'm really excited for the future, because I think CTV creates one of the greatest opportunities in the history of marketing, in that an advertiser can bring their data, they can manage frequency on a holistic basis across their media plan, and they can get the incremental reach and frankly, just the reach out of connected television that wasn't possible a few years ago. And I think that mixture, especially with the great content that's coming through all of the AVOD services today, creates one of the greatest opportunities, I think, in the history of marketing.